People have a very specific picture in their heads of what the end of a marriage looks like. They imagine screaming, slammed doors, someone's clothes hurled from a second-floor window onto a wet driveway. They want the ending to match the size of the loss, loud and impossible to ignore. But my husband ended 8 years of marriage on a Wednesday afternoon in March while scrolling through his phone. He didn't even set it down. He just looked up briefly, said, "I think we both know this isn't working anymore," and went back to whatever he was reading. No raised voice, no apology, not even the courtesy of eye contact. My name is Lacey Harmon. I'm 32 years old, and I want to tell you about the quietest ending I've ever survived, and what grew out of the silence it left behind. But before I do, like and subscribe, and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? When my husband and I met, I was 23 and he was 29, and neither of us had anything to prove yet. He was working on his first commercial real estate project, a small mixed-use building in the Reno district of Denver, 2 floors of retail and 4 of apartments. He was scrappy and ambitious, and he used to drive around the city pointing at buildings he planned to buy someday, the way other people point at constellations. I was an architectural illustrator. I created detailed visual renders, hand-drawn and digital, of buildings and interiors before they were built. Architects and developers used my work to pitch clients, secure financing, sell a vision before the concrete was ever poured. It was a niche field, but I was good at it. I'd been freelancing since college. I had a growing client list and a portfolio I was proud of. We were equals. That's the thing I keep coming back to. In the beginning, we were genuinely, completely equals. I remember sitting cross-legged on the floor of his half-empty apartment, eating pad thai from the carton, while he spread his blueprints across the coffee table and talked me through the floor plan. He asked for my opinion on the lobby design, he said. I had an eye for space. He said he was lucky to know me. I believed him. We got married 3 years later in a small ceremony in Estes Park, just family and close friends, mountain views, my grandmother's pearl earrings. It was everything I wanted. I was happy. I had no reason to think it would change. The change came the way most bad things do. So gradually you only recognize it in hindsight, when you line up all the small moments and finally see the shape they make together. My husband's company grew. His first building sold at a profit. He leveraged it into a second project, then a third. He hired a staff. He bought a house in Cherry Creek, a real house, not the condo where we'd started. He drove a nicer car. He wore suits that cost more than my first semester of college. And somewhere in all of that growth, he stopped seeing me as someone who was growing, too. The first crack came about 3 years into the marriage. I had just been asked to create the full render package for a major mixed-use development in Boulder. The kind of project that could redefine a career. I was going to be publicly credited. My work was going to appear in the developer's press materials, in the Denver Business Journal's feature on the development, possibly in an Architectural Digest regional spread. I came home that evening holding a bottle of champagne. I had his favorite dinner waiting, lamb chops, roasted asparagus, the good bread from the bakery on 6th. He walked in on a phone call. He held up one finger in my direction without making eye contact, the universal signal for don't speak, and went straight past me into his home office. He was in there for an hour and 40 minutes. I watched the clock. When he came out, the lamb was cold. I had already eaten mine standing at the kitchen counter. I have some good news, I said anyway. I told him about the Boulder project, about the credit, about Architectural Digest. He opened the refrigerator. "That's great, babe," he said, in the exact tone people use when they haven't heard a single word you said. "Hey, I need you to call the contractor tomorrow about the HVAC issue on Larimer. They're not calling me back and it's getting old." I stood there holding a champagne flute. "Did you hear what I said?" I asked. "This is a significant opportunity for my career." He leaned against the counter with a beer and looked at me the way he looked at things that were mildly inconvenient. Not with cruelty, exactly, but with a complete and practiced absence of interest. "Lacey," he said, "I closed a $7 million financing deal today. I can't really get into headspace to celebrate your sketches right now." Sketches? He called my career sketches. I set the champagne glass down very carefully on the counter and didn't say another word about it. That was the first crack. Over the years that followed, it became a fracture, then a canyon. He stopped asking about my projects. He stopped introducing me to his colleagues by my name and started calling me my wife, like that was enough of an identifier. If I tried to add something to a conversation at one of his client dinners, he would talk right over me, smoothly with a smile, the way someone changes a radio station without acknowledging what was playing. He decided everything about our life, where we vacationed, Scottsdale every year, because he liked the golf, how we decorated the house, all white and modern, which I hated. It felt like living in a showroom no one was allowed to touch, which weekends were reserved for his networking events. My 31st birthday. He booked a table at a steakhouse I didn't particularly like, for a party of 8 people who were all his friends and business contacts, and he called it making it special. When I told him quietly, on the drive there, that I'd wanted a quiet night, just the two of us, he looked at me like I'd said something unreasonable. I made a reservation, he said. That's effort, Lacey. I sat at that dinner for 4 hours and smiled and said nothing true to anyone. Afterward, I went to the restaurant bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. My eyes were flat. I didn't recognize the expression on my own face. I had been wearing it so long it had become the default, and I couldn't pinpoint when that happened. I should have left then. I know that now. But when someone spends years quietly convincing you that your perspective is too small, your needs too inconvenient, your work too minor to take seriously, you begin to believe it. Not all at once, grain by grain. And once you've stopped trusting your own read on things, you don't leave. You wait. You try harder. You dim yourself down another notch and tell yourself maybe this is just what marriage looks like up close. I was wrong. The discovery happened on a Saturday in October. I was cleaning out the coat closet, one of those productive fall Saturdays when the sky has gone gray and you need something to do with your hands. My husband was out playing golf. I pulled out his charcoal wool overcoat to take it to the cleaners, and something fell from the breast pocket. A receipt from Cartier on 16th Street, a gold bracelet, $3,200, purchased 3 weeks earlier. I had not received any jewelry in 3 weeks. I had not received any jewelry in approximately 2 years. I stood in the doorway of the closet for a moment. Then I walked to the kitchen table and sat down. I opened our joint American Express account on my phone. I started scrolling back. Hotel charges I didn't recognize, not budget ones. The Oxford Hotel downtown. The Broadmoor in Colorado Springs. A boutique in Aspen the weekend he told me he was taking clients skiing. Restaurant charges on evenings he said he was stuck at the office. Places I'd never been, at prices that suggested wine was involved. I scrolled for 20 minutes. My coffee went cold. My hands were completely steady, which surprised me. When he came home that evening, tan from the afternoon sun, and carrying his golf bag, I was sitting in the living room with the Cartier receipt on the coffee table, and my hands folded in my lap. He saw it. He stopped. I watched his face cycle through 4 different expressions in the span of 2 seconds. I can explain, he said. I know you can, I said. I don't want the explanation. He tried anyway. He said it wasn't serious. He said I didn't understand the pressure he was under. He said Brielle. I learned her name then. Brielle, his 26-year-old marketing coordinator. He said she just understood him in a way that was hard to put into words. Are you going to fight for this? He asked. He seemed almost annoyed, like I was taking too long to respond. No, I said. He looked stunned. He had expected a scene. He'd probably been bracing for it the whole drive home from the golf course, steeling himself for the crash. Instead, I said, I need you to leave the house for a few days. I'm contacting a divorce attorney first thing Monday. He left. He went to one of his investment properties, and Monday morning I called a divorce attorney, a woman with a reputation for being thorough in cases involving business assets. Her name was Ms. Garland. She had short silver hair and reading glasses on a beaded chain, and she listened to everything I said without interrupting. When I finished, she set her pen down and asked me one question I hadn't expected. Tell me about your illustration work, she said. Did you ever create renders for his company? I paused. All the time, I said. For years, every major project, I did the pitch renders for his 3 largest developments. Did you have a formal contract, a work-for-hire agreement? No, I said. I was his wife. I just helped him. I thought we were building something together. Ms. Garland smiled, not warmly, but the way someone smiles when they recognize something significant. Let's talk about that, she said. I won't go into the full legal detail here. What I'll say is this. Under U.S. copyright law, creative work belongs to the person who made it, not the person who commissioned it, unless there's a specific written agreement saying otherwise. A work-for-hire contract. I had created dozens of architectural renders for my husband's company over 7 years, as a freelance professional, without any such agreement in place, which meant the copyright on every single one of those pieces legally belonged to me. My husband didn't know I had flagged this. When the divorce settlement was drawn up, I asked for my professional files, my equipment, and, quietly, without fanfare, a legal acknowledgement that my illustration work was my intellectual property. His attorney didn't raise a flag. My husband agreed because he thought it was sentimental. He thought I wanted to keep the drawings because I was emotional about them. He signed without understanding what he was signing away. The papers were finalized in December. I moved out of the Cherry Creek house while he was at a conference in Phoenix. I took my clothes, my illustration equipment, my grandmother's pearls, the quilt my mother had hand-sewn in pieces over 6 years, and my cat, a tabby named Clover, who had never liked my husband and had made a quiet project of expressing this through targeted furniture damage. I left the white furniture. I left the Scottsdale memories. I left the woman I had slowly become in that house. The drive to Vermont took 3 days. My grandfather had died 3 years earlier and left me his property in a small town called Crestfield. 2 acres, a 1940s farmhouse, and an old woodworking shop in the back, set into a hillside that went gold in fall and white in winter. My husband had wanted me to sell it. He'd called it a money pit. He'd called it some shack in the middle of nowhere. I had quietly paid the property taxes from my own account every year. Crestfield was 5 miles from the New Hampshire border, tucked into the kind of hills that make you understand why people used to believe in things they couldn't prove. The farmhouse had low ceilings and wide plank floors and a wood-burning stove I had to look up on YouTube. The first night I arrived, it was 22 degrees outside, and something in the pipes was making a sound I couldn't identify. I sat on the kitchen floor wrapped in my grandmother's quilt, with Clover in my lap and a box of crackers in front of me, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Safe. Not comfortable, safe. Comfortable is the Cherry Creek house and the 1,000-thread count sheets and the feeling of living inside someone else's choices. Safe is knowing that nobody was going to walk through that door and make me feel small before I'd finished my coffee. I spent the first 2 weeks cleaning. I fixed the pipe. I learned the stove. I drove into town and bought groceries and talked to the woman at the checkout counter for 15 minutes about the best variety of kale to plant in a Vermont spring, and it was the most genuine conversation I'd had with a stranger in years. I reached out to contacts. I updated my portfolio, and I found an architectural illustration studio in Burlington, 45 minutes north, called Holt Studio, run by a woman named Carolyn Dent, who had been illustrating buildings for 20 years, and whose work hung in the lobby of the Vermont State House. I drove to her office with my portfolio on a Thursday in January, sat across from her while she turned each page in silence and waited. She looked up after 10 minutes. "These are exceptional," she said. "Where have you been?" "Denver," I said. "Well," she said, "Burlington's better. Can you start next week?" Working at Holt Studio was the opposite of everything I had grown used to. Every opinion I offered was taken seriously. The first time Carolyn held up one of my renders in a client meeting and said, "This is what we brought Lacey in for. Look at the way she handles light in an interior." I had to excuse myself briefly. I stood in the bathroom and took 3 slow breaths over the sink. I had forgotten this was possible, that someone in a professional setting could simply say a true thing about your work, out loud, and mean it. My routine became my medicine. I woke early. I made coffee in my grandfather's old percolator. I drove the hills to Burlington with the radio up, and the window cracked even in February, because I liked the cold air on my face. I worked hard. I came home and cooked simple things. Soup, roasted vegetables, the kind of meals that make a house smell like someone actually lives in it, and ate at the kitchen table with a book propped against the salt shaker. On weekends, I worked on the farmhouse. I sanded the floors and stained them a warm honey brown. I painted the front door dark teal. I stopped thinking about my ex-husband for longer and longer stretches, until whole weeks, and I'd realize I hadn't thought of him once. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, A college friend called to make sure I'd heard. My ex-husband was getting married. To Brielle. In 4 weeks. A big ceremony at a venue outside Denver. The manor house at Sunrise Ridge, she said. The kind of place that starts at $12,000 for the space alone. Everyone in his social circle was talking about it. I was standing in my grandfather's woodworking shop when she told me, sorting through a box of his old hand planes. I had sawdust on my sleeves and paint on my left forearm. I waited for the bitterness, the sick feeling, the jealousy. There was nothing, just the clean smell of old wood and the sound of Clover knocking something over in the corner. Good for him, I said. I meant it, not warmly, just accurately. He was someone else's equation to solve now. I didn't think about the wedding again until Howard Aldgate called me the following Sunday afternoon, approximately 1 week after the event. Howard was 74 years old, a retired attorney who had handled my grandfather's estate for 35 years and known our family longer than I'd been alive. He was also, through a long, tangled history I won't bore you with, an old acquaintance of my ex-husband's father, which was how he'd come to be on the wedding guest list. "Lacey," he said when I picked up, "pour yourself something. I have a story." I poured herbal tea. He told me to get something stronger. I compromised with coffee. The reception had been lavish, Howard said. Cocktail hour with past hors d'oeuvre, a 5-piece band, centerpieces he estimated had cost more than a decent used car. My ex-husband was in his element, moving from group to group, telling the story of his next major development, a 62-unit mixed-use project in downtown Denver, the biggest deal he'd ever attempted. He was pitching it to a cluster of potential outside investors, showing them the renderings on a tablet. The architectural illustrations that had appeared in every piece of marketing material, in the investor prospectus on the development website, in the Denver Business Journal preview. Howard said he recognized my work instantly. He'd known it since I was 25 years old and had shown him my portfolio over coffee at my grandfather's kitchen table. He leaned to the investor standing nearest to him, a man Howard knew from a previous professional context, and said, conversationally, "Beautiful illustrations, aren't they? She has a real gift." The investor said, "Who does?" Howard said, "Lacey Harmon. She's up in Vermont now, built quite a name for herself." The investor looked at the renders, then at Howard. I assumed those were proprietary to the development company. Howard tilted his head thoughtfully. "I'm not certain there was ever a formal work-for-hire agreement in place. You'd want your counsel to verify that before any offering closes, just as a matter of due diligence." He said that within 3 minutes, the investors had quietly pulled together, and one of them had stepped away from the table, with a phone pressed to his ear. My ex-husband noticed something had shifted before anyone said a word directly to him. Howard watched it happen, the slight realignment of postures, the way the investors stopped leaning in. My ex-husband moved toward the group. He looked at Howard. Howard smiled pleasantly and said, "Congratulations on the wedding. Lacey's rendering style really does photograph beautifully." Howard said my ex-husband went white, not pale white, like something had been switched off behind his face. He began to stammer. He said something about the work having been done within the marriage. One of the investors asked whether that had been confirmed as a legally defensible position. My ex-husband said he'd need to consult his attorney. "At your wedding reception," the investor repeated, flatly. The investors did not leave the party, but they left the conversation. And when the investment check on my ex-husband's project was supposed to clear the following week, it didn't. Howard, for his part, simply went back to the buffet. What Howard didn't account for, what nobody did, was the bored teenage son of a family friend who'd been filming clips at the reception to pass the time. He had his phone out when my ex-husband cornered Howard near the bar an hour later, voice rising past the level a person in an expensive suit should ever let it go. Brielle appeared at his elbow and tried to calm him down. He turned and snapped at her. The camera caught all of it. By Monday morning, a 15-second clip was circulating. My ex-husband, face red, telling a 74-year-old man that he had no idea what he was talking about. While his new bride stood 3 feet away looking like she was running calculations she didn't like the results of. Someone had added a caption. "Groom melts down over his ex-wife's artwork on his wedding day. This is real. This is at the reception." It crossed 400,000 views by Wednesday. The comments were what you'd expect. "That poor woman? The new one. Wait, he was using her work this whole time? The ex really said you can have the chaos. I kept the copyright. The outside investors formally withdrew from the project the following week. My ex-husband's firm had been counting on that capital to close on the land acquisition. Without it, the deal collapsed. A business partner who had staked his own money on the deal filed a civil claim against the company. I know this because Ms. Garland kept me informed. None of it was something I had done. I had not called any investor. I had not posted anything online. I had not spoken to a single person in Denver. Howard had told the truth to the right people at the right moment, and the rest had unfolded on its own. 3 weeks after the wedding, my ex-husband called me. I stared at his name on my screen. I thought about what I owed him. The answer was nothing. Less than nothing, actually, when I ran the full accounting. But I was standing in my warm kitchen on a Saturday morning, with Clover on the counter beside me, and the Vermont hills visible through the window above the sink, and I felt completely, solidly untouchable. So I answered. "Lacey," he said. He sounded smaller, like someone had let the air out of the version of him I used to know. "I know you've heard what happened," he said. "I need us to work something out. You help me get the investors back on track. I'll make it financially worth your time. We can structure it however you want." "You already structured that in the settlement," I said. "Lacey." His voice cracked in a way I didn't recognize. "The deal is gone. My partner is suing me. Brielle and I, things are not good right now." I looked out the window. The hills were covered in snow. The woodworking shop light was on because I'd been in there earlier, teaching myself to use my grandfather's old hand plane. The farmhouse roof held out the cold perfectly. "I'm sorry things are difficult," I said. And I meant it, not warmly, but the way you mean it when you watch something collapse that you once tried very hard to hold up. A kind of distant final recognition. "I need your help," he said. "You needed my help for 8 years," I said. "I gave it to you freely. I gave you my time and my ideas and my work because I thought we were building something together. You decided we weren't. That was your choice. You made it. Now I'm making mine." He started to say something else. "Get a good attorney," I said. "Goodbye." I hung up. I set the phone face down on the counter and picked up my coffee and went back to looking at the snow, and I felt the last of something I'd been carrying, the last small weight of it, released from somewhere in my chest. That was 8 months ago. I am now a full partner at Holt Studio. My name is on the glass door, Denton Harmon Architectural Illustration. Carolyn said I'd earned it and that she wasn't interested in my being modest about it. I used part of my divorce settlement to establish a small annual grant, the Harmon Emerging Artist Award for women, men under 30 working in architecture and design in New England. The amount isn't enormous yet, but it's growing. It means something I built is now funding someone else's beginning. The farmhouse is finished. The floors are warm. The stove is my closest friend from November to April. Clover sleeps on a drop cloth in the woodworking shop while I work on weekends. Arranged made with the confidence of someone who has made a binding legal claim on the space. In the spring, I'm putting in a kitchen garden along the south wall, where the light is best. I hear things about my ex-husband occasionally, through people who still know both of us. The lawsuit settled, apparently, and not in his favor. He and Brielle are still together, as far as anyone knows. I stopped keeping track some time ago. I don't think about revenge. I'm not sure I ever really did. Revenge requires you to keep your attention on the person who hurt you, and I ran out of attention for him long before any of this happened. What I think about instead, the morning light on fresh snow, a new commission coming in, a residential project in Stowe, a family building their dream home in the mountains, the particular satisfaction of a render where the shadows fall exactly right. What it feels like to say exactly what I think in a meeting and have the person across the table lean forward to hear more. What it feels like to stand at my kitchen window at 6 in the morning with both hands around a mug, looking out at the hills, and feel, fully, without qualification, like the person standing there belongs completely to herself. He used to tell me I had no real ambition. He used to say I was lucky to have someone like him to carry the actual weight. Meanwhile, he was using my work to sell the biggest deal of his career. He just forgot to check who owned it. Some people spend their whole lives trying to make themselves larger by making other people smaller. The thing they never figure out is that it doesn't work. You can't borrow your way into a legacy. You can't build something lasting on something you took without asking. I didn't ruin his life. I simply stopped being available for him to build on. And the moment I stepped back, the whole thing came apart under its own weight, the way anything built on a borrowed foundation eventually does. I poured my coffee this morning and stood on the front porch in the cold. The hills were pink in the early light. Clover sat on the railing beside me, deeply offended by the temperature but too proud to go back inside. I am 32 years old. I am divorced. I am standing on a farmhouse porch in Vermont at 6:15 in the morning. And I have never once, not for a single day, doubted the door I walked through to get here. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stop pretending that someone deserves access to what you've built.